Hi, how are you? Good to see you. I'm glad you're with me and you're tuned in. Pardon me. Maybe I can tune in to the Guts to Be podcast. Anyway, yeah, welcome. My name is Tammy Davis and I am your host. Today we're talking about the guts to be wrong. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, honestly, my question is, are any of us how many of us actually have the guts to be wrong about anything, right? In my opinion, in my humble opinion, when we allow ourselves to be wrong, we open ourselves up to other possibilities. And what do I mean by that? Life is multifaceted. I've always talked about it as being a gem, and each one of us holds our own unique perspective. And although we see through our lens and we hear through our lens, and by the way, if you would leave a comment below if you prefer audio or video, I would greatly appreciate that because then I would know how to better serve you. But in this case, I'm doing both. And I appreciate all of you, whether you're on YouTube or you're on Spotify or any of the platforms. I really appreciate you. But that said, thank you. If you're new, welcome. I'm glad you're here. Please check out the previous recordings, both audio and video. And yeah, and I'll make sure that you guys have links in the description as far as how to get to both the podcast as well as because my host for the podcast is Podpage, and then it actually just sends it out to different platforms, and then of course YouTube. So I'll make sure you guys get all of that. But like I said, today we're talking about the guts to be wrong. And if we open ourselves up to being wrong, and even though we have our own unique way of hearing and seeing things, it does come as there's a hindrance to it because our perspective is skewed based on cultural beliefs. Okay, so how we were raised, how we were, the people we hung out with in school as young people, young adults, however old we are around, whether we're working with people, it's just we are a culture all unto ourselves, and it's a culmination of everything that we've picked up and adapted along the way. That word adapt is important for this show. And that said, I'm wondering if you have the guts to be wrong about your idea of addiction. Ooh, did I lose you? I hope not. Here's the deal. We all are living with addiction. If that triggers you, if you're sitting there going, well, I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't do drugs, consider that addiction is while we classify it as a disease due to the changes that occur within the dopaminergic mesolimbic pathway. Now, no worries, I'm not going to hold you to remembering that name, that word, that phrase. But the fact is that change to that particular area of the brain denotes is how they qualify addiction. And that's why they call it a disease, because there's actually a change within the tissues. Now, we do realize that there are certain substances, including alcohol and cigarettes, that have actually that are tied to addiction, but technically these are addictive type behaviors. And I've already done one recording of this, and I walked away and I thought, that wasn't what I wanted to say. And so I'm back because it's really, I know the message that I want to bring through here. So whether we're talking about cocaine, whether we're talking about alcohol, whether we're talking about sugar, tobacco or nicotine rather, um, caffeine. Okay, I mean we relate addiction, and there's a real hang up in our society around the word addiction because it's like it's taboo, and we're teaching our children that. I mean, what really pisses me off is that we're teaching our kids that the body is defective, that there's a weakness to it and it's mutated. And I mean, if you didn't listen to the last episode, The Guts to Be Abnormal, I invite you to do so because I talk a lot about how we are normalizing symptoms. And in this case, we're teaching our children that these symptoms are normal, okay? Any health disturbance, any sort of discomfort is normal. Okay. Now look, if you fall down and you hurt yourself and there's a scratch and you got some swelling and an infection and there's pain, okay, that's to be expected. Stimming, we relate to it as a normal symptom of autism. Stimming is an addictive type behavior. It's repetitive, right? These kids are discharging, releasing energy, self-soothing. Addictive type behaviors are for self-soothing. And what we have currently is we link addiction to prescription pills, to alcohol, everything I've listed so far. People will go, well, I'm weak because I can't stop eating carbs and sugar. You're not weak. You're not weak at all. Your body's freaking hungry. And I mean that with all due respect, it's actually very, very hungry because ultimately what we are addicted to is the stress response. And I say addicted in the sense that it generates repetitive behaviors for self-soothing. You might be wondering how somebody who is like tweaking on cocaine, how that looks like that's self-soothing. It's if you're not used to using cocaine or you don't understand it, that's fine. And I'm going to explain more about that in a moment. But the fact is that addiction is, again, a change to the brain structure. And everything I've listed so far, for most part, most of the illicit drugs, there's some that don't lead to that particular change they've identified. Caffeine does. And I've got one more surprising chemical that absolutely changes that structure of the brain that we don't talk about. Not you and me, not amongst our family, but I'm talking about scientifically. The research is not being released publicly. That's a huge concern because, as I said, we're teaching our children that the body is defective and it's mutating. And in fact, what it's doing is it's adapting. It's adapting based on the stress response. What is stress? Well, stress is actually a survival mechanism that is activated when we are emotionally, mentally traumatized, potentially physically traumatized. There's a potential physical threat as well as environmental that we don't even know about. I mean, we hear talk of all these chemicals that are not good for us. At this point, there are over 70,000 chemicals, man-made chemicals, that have been identified as endocrine disruptors, which means they alter the function of the hormonal system. But on the other hand, we're teaching our children that addictive behaviors, addiction is for the weak, and that they should have better control over their decisions. And while some may, have the conviction to say no to using an illicit drug or starting to smoke or getting involved with alcohol, chances are they've had their fair share of caffeine. Over 90% of the world's population consumes caffeine on a daily basis. That puts 90% of the world's population in the category of addictive type behaviors. Okay, we're not going to use the word addiction because, again, the word addiction means there's a change to the brain structure, and everything that I've discussed so far changes that structure. So how do we explain? So let's back up. Okay, let's bring it back. Gambling, retail therapy, sex, love, and relationships. Those are behaviors. Those are things that people do, right? Stimming. There are no chemicals involved that we're introducing to the body, and yet they're still classified as addictive behaviors. We've taken it and down in the DSM-5. Now we call them substance abuse disorders. Okay, so instead of calling it an addiction, but then you have these other classifications of people who get put in, or I should say populations of people that get placed in treatment for these very things that I just shared. But how is this possible? Think about that for a minute. How is this possible? Let's just say, for instance, there's no alcohol, there's no drugs, there's no cigarettes, right? There's none of the the taboo. And yet people are being diagnosed with addictive type behaviors. How is that possible? I can tell you how it's possible. And it's the one thing, like I said, that scientists and researchers alike, we're not bringing it forward. We're not talking to people about it. And that's cortisol. Yeah, I think I would hope you know what cortisol is. It's the stress hormone. And I don't mean to sound derogatory, but this is something I'm very, very passionate about. And it really hit me hard this morning. And I want to explain something. I've been not consistent with the recordings for the podcast. And that's basically because there's been a ton of changes that have gone on in my life. And so I intend on becoming more consistent and more reliable as far as what you can expect and when I'm going to release them. And I'll do my best to maintain that schedule. But in the meantime, I appreciate you being here and I appreciate your patience. So, as I said, this really hit me because I got involved in a conversation this morning on Instagram with a woman who lost her brother yesterday at the age of 30 due to opiates, okay, prescription drugs. And I'm very passionate about this because not only was I raised in a house with dysfunction and addiction type behaviors, meaning alcohol and prescription drug abuse, it ultimately led to my own because I was classified as a gifted child from first grade on. So I was separated. It was interesting to me because subsequently, since, over the years, I've studied the brain imaging, tons of psychology classes, upper division, all the way into my senior year in college. And brain development is a very intriguing thing. And I can just briefly share with you that a gifted brain is excitability. It's overall excited. Everything's firing at the same time. Not unlike schizophrenia, which is more random firings. It's spot firings. Okay. And then you have autism, which is, high activity in in a certain area of the brain. ADHD has a high activity in another, but you have heightened activity levels in the brain. This speaks loudly for the changes that are occurring chemically. But in the meantime, like I said, I was classified as gifted, and yet we had special needs kids as well. And those special needs kids were also pulled out. So we had two classifications of students, and then we had what we would consider the neurotypical. And all I wanted to do was just to I just wanted to play. There was so much tension in my home because as the oldest of three girls, I was cooking and cleaning and taking care of my sisters. And my parents didn't spend time with us. We ate dinner separately. They ate their meal in their bedroom behind a closed door. Occasionally we would have meals together, but for the most part, we lived independent lives. And all I really wanted was connection. I just craved connection. And I didn't understand how I could fit in. And I ultimately turned to my own addictive behaviors, which included drugs, alcohol, and disordered eating. So when I learned of this young man losing his life to opiates, it just really came to me that I just felt this very strong pull to come on here and really talk about what the hell addiction actually is and what addictive type behaviors are related to. So back to my initial question, or my question a little while ago, with regards to how can we explain addictive type behaviors that don't involve chemicals? I'll tell you what it is. It's called cortisol, like I said, and cortisol is that stress hormone. I know I already said that, but we're coming back to it. Cortisol is that stress hormone, and they've identified the fact that cortisol, in fact, changes the dopaminergic mesolimbic pathway. What do you think about that? This tells me if a child is in utero and mom and dad have a very stressful life and this child is exposed, what happens with the stress activation, and again, I'll briefly explain this if you're new to me, that the system adapts. There's that word, it adapts. The epigenome has to adapt. And it's adapting every second, every split second that you are above ground. It has to adapt because it helps to regulate your menstrual cycle. It helps to regulate your sleep cycle. It helps to regulate your moods. It helps, and it's very necessary for digestion. And so when the body is threatened, whether it be mentally, emotionally, physically, or environmentally, digestion slows down. We no longer break down the macronutrients because the acetylcholine that is needed for stimulating the production of digestive enzymes is being used to keep our bodies protected from what threat? We don't know what it is because we're just reacting to a thought oftentimes. Or we are reacting to, our interpretations of what somebody's saying to us. Or what we're seeing on the TV, or what we're saying to ourselves. We stress ourselves out more than anybody. By the way, this program is sponsored by Synergessence. You can visit synergessence.com, and you are cordially invited to go to the Synergessence Facebook page. That link is in the description box, because beginning Monday, June 21st, there is the Antioxidant Thinking Challenge. Unlock the remarkable healing powers. Unlock your remarkable healing powers through this challenge. It's an antioxidant thinking challenge, 5 days, 21st through the 25th, 3:30 p.m. Eastern, 12:30 p.m. on the Pacific Coast. And we're going to talk about monotasking on day 1. You are not weak on day 2. This is live. You don't have to come every day at live, but you get more value out of it, I think, if you show up live, because there's interactions that can go on. You're going to get lots of suggestions. There's going to be freebies, or giveaways, I should say. And so that was day 1 and day 2. On Wednesday, it's do less. On Thursday, it's do the opposite. And on Friday, it's hooked on self-love. And I will say more about that there as how that is. And I purposefully didn't use the word addicted, but we're hooked on self-love. And that's the Synergessence Facebook page. Please jump in. I know you will get a lot of value, because yes, it does include revolutionary aromatherapy tips. Back to what we were talking about. So the cortisol does change the brain, which means that at this point, it's fair to say that children in utero are subjected to stress and the changes within. And therefore, when their mother is stressed, like I said, when the parents are having stressful situations, we have a reduction in the digestive process, which now inhibits the use of nutrients, which is now going to stress the fetus. Okay, and so there's going to be, these stressors, the best way I can explain it to you is, as I said earlier, the epigenome is designed to adapt. It's adapting every split second of the day. And stress just changes the production. So like I said, acetylcholine, which is used to produce digestive enzymes, is also used to activate the stress system. And so when that's happening, digestion diminishes, okay? And it ultimately changes the entire hormonal system. And now I firmly believe that a lot of our children are being born with a change to their dopaminergic mesolimbic pathway because their system is stressed. Now, here's the interesting catch. When we talk about addiction, okay, so just to qualify this for you, as I said, I've had psychology classes, I've had counseling classes, and I have gone through addiction treatment courses. I realize I've been through it, but I've been through it as the participant. I wanted to know more about it from a treatment perspective, and I have worked in treatment facilities. And the one thing we do know is that not everybody gets hooked on coke, okay? Some people, cocaine is their go-to. Some people, cigarettes are their go-to. Sometimes it's a combination, but not everybody gets, if we put 10 people in a room and we all started doing a line of coke, 10 people aren't going to walk out. It'd be a real surprise if all 10 of us walked out of there wanting to do more. Some people would have a complete aversion to that. So why is that? Why do some people struggle with alcohol and other people don't? The answer to that question is very simple. It's the chemistry. It's the need that the body has once as the epigenome is changing. Maybe it's more GABA. Okay, maybe you're needing more GABA, so you turn to alcohol because alcohol sources the GABA receptors. Maybe you have a lot of pain, could be emotional pain, and so oftentimes you see people with weed, and they get hooked into opiates. Because why? Because endorphins are an opiate that we actually produce, just like we produce anandamide, which is the bliss hormone, also known as an endocannabinoid. So it's the chemical need of the body that the drugs serve or support. Same thing is true for medications. This is why when people go into treatment, they ultimately get transferred, their addiction gets transferred to a medication. And here's the kicker. When you are taking a lot of medications, especially the psychotropics, you are advised against coming off of it cold turkey. Just like you don't want to quit drinking cold turkey. My girlfriend's brother Stuart was a heavy drinker, and he was in a really, really bad way. So they admitted him into a hospital and did nothing to support the detox process. And he ultimately died because his body went into shock. It needed that. They didn't source his body. They didn't help him to make that transition off the alcohol. That's the reason why when you go into a treatment facility, oftentimes they will give you medications that help you transition because you've detoxed already, but now you need to maintain some sense of stability and balance. So they put you on a medication. But once you leave there, or even if you don't go into treatment, maybe you just are taking an anti-anxiety medication, maybe you're taking an antidepressant. These are all classified as psychotropics, but you are advised against coming off of them because it's dangerous, because your body becomes dependent on those chemicals. And SSRI, which is an antidepressant, it's a serotonin reuptake inhibitor, a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, which means that it's keeping serotonin in the brain. Okay, so these medications control the chemistry of our body, just like the drugs do. They serve a need chemically. Therefore, we become dependent upon the medications. I'm not saying this is good or bad. What I am saying is that there's no difference between a legally administered medication and an illicit drug. And neither one of them should you should not come off of either one of them without the support of a professional. Now, when it comes to medications, it is possible to transition off of the medication, stepping it down by adding oils. But which oils do you use? Don't ask me that question in this forum because I can't answer that question for you unless I speak to you. because what you need is going to be different than what Joe down the street needs. Everybody is different. And we can walk around, waving the flag of diversity and how unique we all are, but somehow or another we still buy into the concept that what's good for one person is good for everybody, and that's nothing could be further from the truth. So if you are in a position and you want to come off your psychotropic medication, it is possible, and I always wish for the blessing of a physician, but if that's something you'd like to do, you can book I have my calendar link in the box. You can book a free appointment with me to at least kind of get some suggestions on where you can go next. Okay. But beyond that, I'm inviting you to please consider your ideas of addiction and addictive type behavior. Consider that you're wrong. Maybe you already thought like this, and that's awesome. But do you have the guts to be wrong about your thoughts on addiction and addictive type behaviors? Because the bottom line is all of us are living with this, and maybe you exercise a lot. Maybe you just exercise to excess, I mean, we have these labels of good addictions and bad addictions. An addictive behavior is an addictive behavior. It's a way of self-soothing. Because somebody selects a drug because it's feeding the chemistry that the body needs is no different than taking a medication. Please, and if you have a child that is going through this, I completely understand, and I'm right there with you, and I'm happy to help you in any way that I can. Maybe it's with me, maybe it's with somebody I know. But the bottom line is that this is a serious need. It's a huge indication that the body is way out of balance and that the stress response has taken over, and we're finding ways to self-soothe. Now, if you exercise to excess, and you're okay with that, I still invite you to take the antioxidant thinking challenge. Because my mission, my movement is to clean it up. And I'm not talking about cleaning it up with medications or from drugs. I'm talking about cleaning up the way we relate to ourselves. And that may be learning how to kind of dial it back a little bit with the exercise, just a thought, or the emotional eating, all of those things that we humans do. So I'm going to leave you with that, with the links in the box below. And I look forward to seeing you next week. 3:30 Eastern, beginning Monday, on the Synergisms Facebook page. Mwah! You guys, I'll see you soon.